Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining me in this panel. This is my last contemporary YA debut panel of the summer, which is to me like the epitome of contemporary YA, truly thriving this summer. I'm so happy to be joined by these fantastic authors. Um, just a little bit about me before before we actually jump into what we're going to be chatting about today. My name's Lily. I'm the moderator, kind of all over the internet as Utopia State of Mind. And also, just so you know, we will have time for some questions at the end. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat whenever you want. And then I'll try to remember and also get back to them depending on my ability to do both of those things. So let's chat about, one thing I wanted to talk about before the authors introduce themselves. I did want to say that for this panel, we are especially dedicated to creating a very safe space. So it's like we don't tolerate any harassment of any kind or any hate speech. And so just know that if we find that you are engaging in that activity, we will have to remove and probably block you. Okay, so I would love the authors, we can introduce ourselves and then we will chat about the questions. So you want to start, Jen?
Hi, I'm Jen Ferguson. I'm Métis on my father's side and white Canadian settler on my mom's side, and I am the author of The Summer of Bitter and Sweet, which came out May 10th from Heartdrum. The Summer of Bitter and Sweet is about 18-year-old Métis teen Lou, and she's having a very tumultuous summer, and that's where I'm going to leave it.
Hi, everyone. My name is Aaron. I am a bisexual Mexican writer born and raised in East LA, but now I live in Austin. I'm the author of This Is Why They Hate Us, which is about a bi Chicano teen who has a crush on his best friend, and in order to get over him, tries to get under some other people.
Hi, everyone. My name is Angie Mosqueda. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm also a bisexual Chicana, but I'm from the Rio Grande Valley where my book is set. So I have a book called Just Your Local Bisexual Disaster that, I'm sorry if you can hear that. Just Your Local Bisexual Disaster. And it's about 17-year-old Maggie growing up on the Texas-Mexico border, and she's trying to find an escort for her little sister's quince. And the search is made all that much more complicated when she realizes she has very confusing feelings for 3 of her best friends.
Hi guys, my name is Claire. My pronoun is she, her, and this is my book. It's called I Guess I Live Here Now. Was released May 24th, I think. And it's about a teenager that was born and raised in New York with her mom, and she is forced to move to Seoul, Korea, and kind of be reunited with her estranged father, and discovers a lot of family secrets that her parents hid from her while she is living or trying to live her best life there. And I am also from Korea. I was born and raised there most of my life, and I came to New York to attend university and have been here since.
Hi, I'm Grace Shim. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm the author of The No Family, and that came out May 3rd. And The No Family is about a girl who, a teenage girl who takes a 23andMe test kind of as a joke, but then discovers a secret family in Seoul, Korea, who happen to be ultra rich. And then she gets invited to go visit them and discovers a lot more than she bargained for.
Yeah, I just bring the summaries just bring back all the nostalgic feels when I read these books. So just excuse the emotional sort of waterfall. The first question that I want to start off with was, what was the first thing you thought of for your story, and also what was like the last element that kind of clicked into place? Because not every, I mean, I have never written, nor will I ever write, so I'm not really sure how that happens. But I would imagine that not everything is set when you start off writing a book and like drafting. So yeah, I wanted to know the first like idea kernel, I guess, and like the last piece that kind of slid into place.
So I remember the first thing that came to me with This Is Why They Hate Us, I just kind of sat down at my sister's dining room table, and I just heard this kid's voice, and he was thinking about masturbating, and I just remember it was very like it was very clear to me. And then he like the first line was, "My mom calls it playing with yourself," which is indisputably the worst way to put it. And then he just kind of like has this internal monologue, and I remember that just came to me. So it was like the voice was there, and then I drafted it very quickly. So the last element to come into place, even with like my edits with my agent and then my editor, was actually plot. I forgot to have a plot. It was just I remember when I was trying to choose an agent, a lot of them were just like, it feels like a series of vignettes, and we need a through line. We need something that sort of threads everything together and gives it narrative shape. So really important thing, but I think we got there mostly. I like vibes in books, so I'm like, it's all about the vibes, but we tried to do like a scaffolding sort of thing.
I'll follow that because my book was also just like mostly a vibe. First of all, it was based on a Halsey song at the start in one of the first 7 drafts. It was when Bad at Love came out, and I was just thinking about how much more complicated it is to be someone who is like bad at love and like a kind of a disaster when you're bisexual, because everybody, like, because of how it looks, everyone thinks you like can't decide or you're greedy or like blah blah blah. And then so it's hard, it makes it hard for you to figure out who you are and what kind of relationships you want. And so I was told I could not name the book Bad at Love, which is now upsetting because I've seen so many books with the titles of Taylor Swift songs. So I would like to go back and do a reprint. But I think that was the first kernel, the idea of like exploring that. And I wanted to explore it within YA because I wanted a character who had a safe space and a good environment in which to like explore these issues, because I was always thinking about what it would have been like to have all of this personal development when I was actually a teenager. Like how much heartbreak could I have saved myself if I had a safe space to figure it out. So I think that was really just, I really just wanted a vibe of low stakes and everyone just like hanging out together all the time. And sometimes stuff happens, but in the end, there's like a good ending and nobody dies.
Also, you have a really great title. I mean, like
it is really great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I had to, that was where we landed when I had Bad at Love pried from my little fingers. But they were just like, really, this is the heart of the book. And I kind of had to overcome my own like biphobia a little bit, because I was like, oh, well, like people won't like it. And if it's like right on the cover, people won't buy it. What if, then I had to have a talk with myself and be like, Andrea, like if you're really going to say all these things in a book, but can't write it on the title, like what kind of ally are you to the bisexual community of me? What kind of ally am I to myself?
Yeah, so with The Summer of Bitter and Sweet, the title was the last thing that showed up. Everything I tried to title it was wrong. It just wasn't working. So when my agent came up with The Summer of Bitter and Sweet, I was like, fine, we'll just put that as a placeholder title when we go out to editors. And my editor loved it. And then marketing had nothing bad to say about it. So it just kind of, it stuck the whole way through. The first thing, which is, for me, it's usually a scene that like Aaron was talking about sort of like shows up fully formed in my head. For this book, it was knowing that at some point Lou would like take her tent, which I knew was going to be a purple tent, and like head out somewhere on her family's property. And at some point, King would show up. That was like the scene I was writing towards. And it's near the end of the book. So like that works out great. With the book I'm working on right now, the like scene that came to me is like in the 3rd chapter. And I'm like, how do you keep writing if you don't have something to write towards?
I'll go next. My typical way, this is my debut book, but it's not the typical way that I draft. So I was actually working on a book, based on like more like a vibe and all those low stakes, nobody dies, happy ending. I really that's just kind of like the stories that I was writing. And then it wasn't really, I was revising a book, and then quite literally, like the inception of the story just hit me when my sister took a DNA test. And so I feel like the things that unfolded after we discovered who, some secret family on my dad's side, like I felt like this was a story that kind of had to be written. I mean, I was against it for a long time, but everyone knew I was working really hard on this other book that wasn't really going anywhere. And they kept telling me, you have to write the story, you have to write the story. And I really didn't want to write the story. And then like every like twist and turn that happened in our life, which it's really not that as dramatic as the book is, but like I do feel like I promise, like this is the reason why I kind of feel like awkward talking about it, because the book is really it's really dramatic in a lot of ways that is not realistic, but I drew the inspiration from my own life, and it's not anywhere near as dramatic as this, but it is kind of life-changing in a way, when you discover a different new family. It was new to us, the family members, but it wasn't new to like older generations. So it wasn't as like, it wasn't like as dramatic or anything like that. But I think the idea of it was, I want to start with her taking a DNA test. And it really did start out that way. So my other books, I literally have written like, I don't know, like 25 first chapters. But this one, I actually just wrote like one first chapter, and I was like, oh my God, this is maybe there is something to this book. So then I wrote it. The interesting thing was I knew how I wanted it to end, but like for my main character was closure, but my agent had this amazing, there's like this one like cliffhanger drop, at the very end of it. And that was something that my agent suggested. And I think like now that I've written it and it's gone out to publication, I feel like I can't see it ending any other way than that. But it was literally like, the first thing that came to my mind was the beginning of it, and the last thing that came was the end of it. So that's no surprises there, I guess.
I guess for me, I guess I can't say I have a routine with books, because this was the first full novel that I've ever written. And it was sort of like a years in progress type of thing, right? It wasn't like a big moment at the kitchen table like Erin. And I wish I had that kind of like glam moment that I can be like, hurrah, eureka, I found that moment to start a book. But my book really started out as a middle grade novel. And my teacher wanted me to try aging up the characters so I could explore themes that she thought were a little easier to explore in the young adult category. So it was a very logical decision. In terms of like how the novel came to me, I think that similar to Grace, like it's not that it's based on my life per se, but as a debut author, I think a lot of this is simply what I experienced to some degree, and obviously fiction, romanticize and fictionalize. Is that not a word? And thanks, Shen. Yeah, so I think a lot of it was just simply writing what I knew and what I had gone through, and adding some jazzy tweaks to my experiences and my friends' experiences. And I wrote just like snippets, and I didn't actually start from the beginning. Sometimes I personally find the beginnings to be really difficult, because I'll think of a scene that is just happening and it's really not the beginning. So I'll write random chapters and sort of thread them through. So in a way, I think I kind of worked backwards rather than like chronologically.
That's really fascinating to me. I love, because I think that how someone approaches something that I've sort of realized as I like speak to more and more authors is that the approach also for each book is so different too. Like even if you have a way that one book worked, that's not necessarily the way it will always work, and so much of it's dependent on the process, and like the heart of the story.
For sure.
Yeah. So I love the idea of like it kind of coming to you at different points and having that, and then kind of weaving it together like that afterwards. So something for the segue, Claire, you were talking about, this is why they hate us, from Aaron, like that moment coming to you at the table, and that just reminds me about how unique and strong the characters' narrations are. And so I wanted to ask, how do you create and find your character's voice? Because I really loved all of the way that each of your books has like different ways, even just like in word choices and like description styles, the way that it's so clear for everyone how they have their own unique kind of personality through dialogue, but also through like thoughts and things like that. So kind of like, how do you create and find a character's voice for your books?
I think I'll take this one first. I think for me, Maggie's voice kind of came very clearly to me in the beginning, and then it was kind of more of a translation in a way of like what she was kind of telling me. So I knew what the general mood of like who I wanted her to be, because she's asking all these big questions. She's melodramatic, she's pining, she's a little whiny, she's a little needy, like she overreacts. Yeah, same. She's a little paranoid. She's a little argumentative, a little defensive. And so I think I tried to communicate that in not only the ways that she talked to people, but also the ways that she kind of like narrated her own voice. And so I think her inner monologue is full of like these abstract like concepts and metaphors, and talking about universes and the sun, and like thinking about this girl and this guy as like a goddess, as a god and a goddess and deities, and thinking about all of these people and holding them on pedestals. So I think for her, it was also just making sure I was listening to like what I said she listened to, or figuring out like what kind of movies she liked, what kind of like things she entertained herself with, because those are all so important to you as like a 17-year-old kid, where like you saw one episode of Skins and suddenly you were Effie Stoneham and it was over for the rest of your personality, or you were on Tumblr a lot. So I kind of gave her like the Tumblr girl personality, but like whatever the equivalent of a Gen Z kid is that didn't embarrass themselves on Tumblr.
So for my day job, I'm a creative writing professor. So I'm just gonna like give you my tip right now. And that is, so part of it comes from like who you are as a writer. And I'm a bit of a literary writer. I tend to overwrite and then have to cut back a lot. I tend to love words and like want to make my characters' voices use words to make them very unique. But then the other thing is, one way to get really, really close to a voice and to create a character's voice is to like think about the things, like how they see the world, how the world is filtered through their eyes. And so for Lou, like Lou's really, she's a water polo player. And so she thinks about water a lot, and uses metaphors that you might use if you were talking about water polo, uses language from water polo and from swimming, and then borrows those terms and moves them into her language when she talks about other things. So that's one way to like really start bringing voice to your characters. Find the vocabulary from one of the things that they love and borrow that vocabulary and bring it into their life when they're talking about things that aren't that particular thing. So that's one of the things I did with Lou, and then combined it with my tendency towards like lyrical writing and towards more literary writing.
It's I love doing these panels because it's like you find parallels with writers, and so like one of the main like motifs in my book too is water, because it's a summer in southern California, and so like pools, ocean, like it comes up, and so I try to incorporate as much like water imagery as I could. So that's really cool. But for voice stuff, Kike, like I said, like it came pretty naturally. I think the thing I had to do was, and again, similar to Jen, is like I would have like a line that I really liked that was like what I thought was good writing. And I was like, what does 17-year-olds say it this way? And I was like, I want to keep it. So yeah. But what I would have to do is I call it diffusing. Like with YA, it's like I think every teenager is capable of like these moments of brilliance in terms of like insights that are unexpected to people who are older and think like I wasn't that profound at 17, but sometimes I'll read stuff and be like, oh my god, like that's so true, like I had that insight at 17, and then it's followed by something that's just so cringeworthy. And I'm like, so I would do that with Kike. I'm like, he would have this insight or he would have this moment of articulating himself very well, and I would have to like add something. Like I think at one point he's talking poetically about someone he really loves, and I just at the end of it I put it blows because I was like, I have to like diffuse this like literary thing and like make it teen, and then so it's just like a little sort of like tweak so that the reader's like, oh right, he's 17.
I really love what you said, Jen, about taking their passion and sort of channeling that into the perspective that they have for the world. That's the tip I'll take when I write my second book. But I think for me, voice is one of the things that powers me through my book because, like Erin, I am a very plotless writer. And that was like the consistent feedback I got from my teacher for years. She'd be like, you did it again, Claire. You did it again. You have a plotless book again. And I think I've never been like quite action oriented in my writing. It was always like character driven and internally motivated. That's what sort of brought my story forward, which isn't always like a realistic way to write multiple books. So I think the voice was sort of the only thing that I had, I don't know if confidence is the right word, but assurance of, like, as I was writing, like the plot could be all over the place. Everything else could be inconsistent, but I feel like once that voice comes to you through one line or through even through like the character's hobbies, right? Like I think, my character Melody, she is passionate about interior design, and that to me already signifies a sort of character trait, right? Like not to stereotype all interior designers, but there are common denominators across different jobs, right, in this world. And so I sort of worked from there to build her voice. I found it harder to separate her voice from other characters. So like, I'm sorry if you can hear that. It's my kid screaming. I feel like I had Melody's voice down from the get-go because her voice was the first part of the book that came to me, but it was a matter of making sure her voice was uniquely hers as I built out my secondary characters and not having that overlap be too similar. And a good tip that one of my former teachers had given me was I should know who's talking without reading the names. So that's sort of what I used as my yardstick.
I think for voice, for me, like all of my main characters will always have a piece of me. And, just like my own personality has different, um, you know, strengths and weaknesses depending on what the angle of the story is. I definitely feel more confident with things that I know more about and less confident in areas that I struggle or insecurities. So I definitely tap into that. And a lot of my main characters it'll be like an, internal monologue almost, of my own self. I do find that the stretch to sound like a teenager is becoming harder as the years go by, but I really try to not try too hard because I think that shows really clearly it comes across and not a good way in books. So I do try to, not make it too trendy, just so that I don't come off as trying too hard. But I do it. A lot of it is my own voice that I write into it, and it's funny because not a lot of my friends have read anything I've written. So this debut book was the first thing that they all got to read that I've written, and I got a lot of comments of, "Oh, this sounded just like you. Like I could hear your voice as I was reading it." So I was like, "Okay, I think that's a good thing. I'm not sure, but it was definitely what I was doing." So, and I think with every book that I do, it'll be some perspective of my voice in there. I think it's interesting, Claire, what you said about the secondary characters not sounding different enough. Like, I have this problem, and I don't know what this says about me, but when I write secondary characters, they're more interesting than the main character. So, yeah, so I'm like, and I think I've had this comment from a CP before where they were like, you don't want that. She's a secondary character, but she's totally stealing the scene. You like, people want more of her and not of your main character. And I'm like, oh crap, what does that say about like me or the main character or the story or me as an author? And so anyways, that kind of plays with me, and I have to be really cognizant of not letting this person steal the show. I think, I don't know, for me in the No family, I feel like her friend Miso definitely was a character that a lot of people really loved, and I loved writing about her. Like, it came really easy for me to write her, and I wished I had a book about her. And then now in my second book, I have another character where my editor was like, "Oh my God, I love him." And I was like, "Okay, but he's like a side character. He's like, what about the main character?" So I have to be very, I have to work harder sometimes to make my main characters jump off the page. And again, I don't know what that says about me because it's really me. But anyways, that's how I work with voice.
Same, Grace. Just gonna say same.
I think I've thought about this a lot, but I think it kind of goes hand in hand with, I feel like, you as a person, and like humans in general, viewing everyone around themselves as like much better than they are. Like, you think everyone is more interesting than you. You think everyone has more interesting problems. You want to hear about everyone else's life because you know everything about you, but you don't know anything about or you don't know how another person works. So you can just build them up as much as possible in your head to be like super interesting because you don't actually know if they're that interesting. And I think I ran into that issue with Maggie in JYLBD because there were a lot of like side characters and love interests, and she was building them all up in her head to be a lot bigger than they were. I often had them purposefully steal the show because I wanted to show how much of her brain space was like being eaten up by these people. They lived in her head rent free.
I've also thought a lot about, Grace, you brought it up. Like, I mean, we've been talking about it, but like the main character is usually not the favorite character. It's usually a side character. And I think it's like, because the main character, I was just thinking about it while we were all talking, is like the whole marathon, not a sprint thing. Like, you're with the main character the entire time, and like they become less surprising to you because you're so used to them. And then you can have someone just sprint by, and like that's the side characters. Like, that's surprising, and like that. And then I think if you like made a side character that people really like the main character, they would like them less because it's like it's less surprising, and like it, like they would overstay their welcome, especially if they're like a big personality. Like, you need someone a little bit, I think, tamer to like guide you through the story. But yeah, I love talking with other writers.
That's totally true. I mean, I feel like I feel like people just don't love the main character because they're seeing a lot more of their flaw.
Yeah, I love what you were saying, Andrea, about like we always think that the people around us are more interesting. That just like that just hits a little too close to home. Like, when you say that to me this afternoon, like that just is too real. But it brings me into the conversation that I wanted to talk about for This Is Why They Hate Us and Just Your Local Bisexual Disaster, because both of your books have not only side characters, but also multiple, I was going to say multiple persons of interest, but no, like multiple potential people, like multiple, what did I write in this question? Multiple potential love interests. And so I wanted to know how you balance the creation of them as something more than just like a side character that you might see a little bit. You know, they're more involved in the story. And if any of both of these or all of these characters went through any major rewrites, you know, as you kind of work through their place in the story and like their evolution themselves as characters, which are also big parts of like the story and the main character story as well.
Erin, you want to go first? Mainly because I'm really curious.
I like that you unmuted to tell me to do it, but yeah, sure. So yeah, I always bring up this Hosier song on his first album. There's a song called Someone New, and it's I fall in love just a little or a little bit every day with someone new, and that's me. I fall in love with almost every person I ever meet, and I'll like imagine us riding off into the sunset, and it's like that's why I like living in New York. I'm being on public transportation. I was just like exhausted 24/7 because I'm like another soulmate. Like, it, so I wanted Kike to be the same way because you know he's a teenager, and you know there is a bi stereotype of you know being a player and whatever. Like he's not that good at it, but he does like fall in love with everyone. So I wanted that aspect of it. But it's funny when we went on submission, the way the story was set up, Kike had, so he's in love with his best friend, Celine. He has a chemistry with his best friend, Fabiola. Like they hooked up before, but they like kind of like were friends. And then he has 3 love interests. And then when we were on submission, he had another love interest who just came up out of the blue. So that's like 6 people that he like, it was so many. And so in my first round of submissions, like I got rejected by all the editors except one, and she offered to revise and resubmit. And so part of the revision was to take out that 6th love interest who had nothing to do with the story and change him into like he's like the one male character, obviously besides his dad, who Kike's not attracted to. And I remember like getting a note like you know they wanted to see that. So yeah, and I just feel like all of the love interests to me are just exploring something that I've seen in my life. So you know, Manny is someone that I grew up with in high school. Ziggy is like certain people I've met in like very distinguished settings, and I'm like, you're so put together. Like, what is that? And then Tyler's like he's my least favorite character, but he's one of the most interesting to me just because he's a white dude, and I feel like in YA I've seen a lot of like interracial relationships where you know a person of color is with a white person and it's like great and they're like very understanding, but my experience of like being with white men is like they say something and I have to bite my tongue not to say anything because I want it to be like a nice date, but I'm like, I'm never going to see you again. And so I wanted to bring that into it. And that was something that's just really fun for me, is to see Kike change based on like who he's interacting with.
I love that you brought that up because the interracial or the like intercultural part of it, where I've like dated white men before during the like Trump 2016 part, and I was like, yeah, I'm just like really upset all the time and sad. And then he was like, oh yeah, that sucks. Not for me though. And I was just like, okay, but anyway, yes, multiple love interests. So I think with Maggie, it was really important for me that all 3 of them kind of existed at the start. And they each had a different relationship with her because I really wanted to explore how when you're kind of growing up and first discovering like all of these like very intense feelings that you have for the people around you, whether they're so intense because they're like the first time you're feeling so deeply for someone. So you don't know what to make of it. You don't know what it means or what it is and how you're supposed to react to it. And so I wanted to kind of just throw all of these like really intense feelings for all of these important people in her life so she could really like evaluate what her relationship was to each of them and what exactly she was feeling. Because a lot of people, I think, mistake romantic love for like the most important, intimate, the deepest connection you could ever have. And I don't know about y'all, but I've had friendship breakups that have scarred me more than any of like my romantic breakups. So I think that was something I really wanted to kind of undo and unravel and have Maggie like feel so she could really experience that. I think in particular, Amanda, who is Maggie's best friend in the book, who was her first crush that made her realize she was bi. And so her feelings for her return, and or a ghost, an echo of them to return. And she has to kind of like go back through the last like few years and wonder like, what was I feeling? What was happening? And it really like kind of echoed the pieces of like my own past where I had that friend as well. And I, sent her a copy of the book and she read it. She's like married with 3 kids now. And she read it. She's just like, feel like I have a different perspective, like of you and our relationship. And I'm just like, yeah, because it's just multifaceted. And I wanted to kind of really explore what parts of you can be caught by the people that what can be kind of your needs that can be fulfilled by people who are not like your significant other, and how having those needs met or not met like in any relationship is different. So I think that's kind of how I handled that.
Yeah, I think for me, something, I don't remember who said it or like when they said it, but I think it was a couple of years ago. And someone, I think an author had said in, I think, an event that I was watching, that when people have like potential love interests or even like a romantic love triangle, that's what they were talking about. They were saying it doesn't even end up becoming about like the person. It ends up becoming about like what they mean to you and sort of what that future would be like, and isn't necessarily even just so grounded in kind of like that person, but kind of what do they represent to you. And so when you're seen as a reader, for the main character, it's more about, yeah, seeing sort of the future you might have and those feelings, and not necessarily even like about the actual person anymore. I wanted to talk as well about, I guess I live here now, in the No family, because there are a lot of pretty serious family shakedowns, and not shakedown. What am I trying to say? Shake ups, like earthquakes. There are a bunch of pretty intense like family earthquake and family drama that goes on. And I wanted to know if you, from the beginning, like always kind of knew what the reveals would be, and also how did you balance like the revelations of the secrets and like the mysteries, so when we find out certain things, or like when we don't find out certain things as well.
I can go first. I'll give you some time, Claire. No, I'm just kidding. I think I knew like the bombshells that needed to be dropped. I think the hard part for me was the IV drip getting there. You know what I mean? Like I without like it was hard. I will admit. Like I think the whole point though through the story, because a lot of the comments that I get is like how naive she is, and I think my main character is not to see all the red flags, and I think that the idea is that she sees it, she just doesn't want to believe it, and that's why she goes along with it, because she really wants what she wants to believe and to be true. And I think that was truly hard for me to like try to plant all those things that would become relevant later when the reveals did happen. And I feel like I did have two reveals that I knew going into it were going to be the reveals. And then so I quickly, hastily wrote the beginning, and then I just like tried to write to the end. And then, so as a result, much of the editorial process was working on that midsection. But, I think one of the things that we worked on, I mean, going a little bit back to your question about like the characters and how they were changed in the process. There's a chauffeur character, and his name is Mr. Kim. And in the original version, he's a man. That's why he's Mr. Kim. This is what was really confusing to people, because he's actually like 23 and he's called Mr. Kim. But originally like when I went to Korea, I had a driver and his name was Mr. Kim, and he was so nice, and he was like a father figure. So I kind of like modeled it after him. But I think because there was no romance interest, they was suggested to age him down and all this stuff. But I just kept the name Mr. Kim because he's a driver, and I don't know. And I think that was really off-putting and confusing to some people, which I understand. But guys, I'm just like, Mr. Kim is just his professional name, I guess. He's not way older. He's not creepy. He's 23. So anyways, I think that was tried to kind of use to throw off some of the weirdness, but and then hopefully it added an element of surprise at the end. But at the same time, like, yeah, like knowing, just because you know the reveals really doesn't make it easier. I think knowing how to do the reveal, that's like it's like the Prestige, it's like everybody knows that the man's going to disappear. It's how you do it or whatever. It's all this stuff leading up to it. So it's like I think that's the real challenge of writing things with plot twists and stuff like that.
So I think I always knew what the secret was going to be, because I'm like very big on plotting before I write stuff. So I kind of knew what it was. I think the things that you can't put in an outline is all the internal character development. Like you kind of just have to write it out, right? To let them grow and do their own thing. You can write like in a bullet point, like, and then Melody feels emotionally connected to her father. There's really, you just can't like formulate that, right? And you just have to write it into the story. So for me, it wasn't so much the ivy dripping though. That's hard. That's so hard, like putting it in little by little. But in terms of like dropping the bomb, like I feel like that is, one of those easier chapters to write because it's so action packed, if anything. But for me, the aftermath is usually harder. It's like, how does a character get impacted because of this? And how is her life turned upside down? And how does she respond to it? One of my biggest notes from my editor was constantly, she was telling me like, you only give me like 3% into her brain. Like something will happen. And then she's like, and then I went to my room and had to study for my test. And my editor was kind of like, is this how you deal with things? Like and I was like, I guess so. I mean, yeah, I'm like playing into the stereotype. Like I suppress a lot of things. Let's just focus on the task at hand. And I feel like that is something you can't do if you're trying to write a fully fleshed novel. So that was my greatest challenge with the whole secret and plot twist was how does Melody handle the new knowledge as it pertains to her relationship with her mom and dad? Because that is like shattered and changed. And I needed to go about it in a way where readers felt convinced by it, and in a way where readers could believe that it was like a normal response for a teenager. Yeah.
I love that term. Yeah, that Gracie brought up, the IV like dripping, I guess, because I feel like I could probably keep a secret for like an hour. So I don't see how I could be able to keep like a secret for a whole book or like whatever. So I can imagine that's, yeah, once you know kind of what has to happen, having to figure out how to like ease into that and then have kind of furtive glances and everything just would like end me. Just be like a breakdown. I wanted to say as well that if you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat. I'm going to ask one last question and then see if there are any other questions. So definitely do that if you have any. In the summer of Bitter and Sweet, one of the things I really loved was the author's note at the end. So presuming that like you haven't read the author's note, I read it like a few times actually, but I wanted to know, because you were talking a little bit about how it was to add your voice to stories, celebrating Indigenous literature. And so I wanted to know what it is like for you to write and explore this space and identity in the story?
Well, thank you for reading the author's note more than once. I am also an essayist in one of my other lives, so like I enjoyed writing that, and then I gave it to a friend, and they were like, "This reads like a creative nonfiction essay," and I was like, "I know, that was intentional," and they were like, "It doesn't read like an author's note." I was like, "All right, we're just gonna go with it." But oh, so what's it like to write from like my own experience as a mixed indigenous and white person? Like it's kind of terrifying a lot of the times. Um because in some ways, like my book is the first YA book from the Heart Drum imprint, so it feels like I'm taking up a lot of space when there are conversations that I should be spending more time listening to than like engaging in. So I feel like with the Summer of Bitter and Sweet, I was writing a story that was very close to my own experience. And that was easier to do because Lou has like some feelings about being Métis, and she has some things that she has to work through, and she has some internalized racism that she has to work through. um and even though she like works through a lot of it, she regresses, right? Because that's how we are as humans. So I mean, I want more voices. I want more indigenous voices out there. I don't want to like be standing here taking up more space. I want to have a variety of voices so that it's not like this is the only book people can point to when they look at like a YA contemporary book about indigenous characters. I don't know if that fully answers the question, but that's what I'm going to offer you.
Yeah, everyone should definitely read the author's note. I thought because I liked that it talks about, because everyone pours so much of themselves writing into a book, and so I think that they always give really interesting insights into kind of the person behind the people, if that makes any sense. Um, the authors. So I have other questions as well that I asked, but also as I was thinking, this is totally just I like a spur of the moment thought as well that I had. So apologies in advance for that. But I love all of the covers. I feel like when I think about covers featuring like POC leads or whatever, like growing up, I feel like didn't have any people on them. And so one of the things that I loved making all the graphics for this panel was like how amazing everyone is kind of all on the forefront, like there's no like I don't know, there's no like paint strip over someone's face, like no one's like turned around looking like into the distance, like everyone is there very much so. Um and so, as I said, apologies for this. My spur of the moment question is chatting about the covers, and sort of, you know, I don't know. I just want to talk about how beautiful they are a little bit, and everyone's thoughts on them, because I think that doing more, like seeing the progression of the amount of more inclusion within sort of the literature space over time, the easiest and quickest way that I can see that is through cover design and through like the attention to those kinds of details. So yeah, free reign to chat about beautiful covers.
So the funny story behind my cover is that I was sort of envisioning like the ice cream shack in the background, and then a picnic table, and then like Lou and King and Florence sitting at the picnic table. And that was like what I thought worked for the book. And my editor made a really great point. And she said something like, there aren't enough covers that feature Indigenous teens. And so we want this to be a portrait. And I was like, you're making a great point. It is not the vision I had, but like, I am not an artist. I don't know how to sell books through covers. So like, I defer to you. And having that sort of like stare, the way Lou is looking at the person who's viewing the book is really super powerful. And it was 100% the right move. Reina Hernandez is a beautiful artist. So that's my little cover story.
I loved the process of my cover. I was super grateful to my team at Viking because they found an illustrator who lives in Korea, and he and I were able to talk a little about just like the direction. And I guess like I put together, I mean, they asked me to put together like a mood board of like Melody's outfits and stuff, but irrelevant of that, I was pretty kind of concerned of like how is Penguin going to accurately portray Korea on the cover? But when they came to me with the Korean artist who lives in Korea and doesn't even speak that much English, like it really hit a soft spot for me. And I think like when I saw even on Grace's book as well, like seeing Korean on a book cover felt so immensely special. Like it is absolutely something I never saw grow. I mean, I didn't really grow up here, but I lived here briefly and I never did see Korean words on a book that is in English, not translated, but meant for teens here. So I felt like that was super special.
I really appreciated like it wasn't even, it's interesting because they asked me about my, the mood board and things like that. And I never even thought about, oh, I want a Korean American author or artist or Korean author. I mean, why do we keep saying author? Artist for the cover. It was not even really a thought, unfortunately, that came across my mind. And I will say this, I think somebody mentioned that, I think maybe it was you, Claire, saying that your editor was like, is this how you handle problems? Like, I really feel like sometimes writing and just the whole process of it is like therapy in a way, And for me, like I had all these ideas of what I wanted the cover to look like, and they looked like covers that I was used to seeing. And when they came up with this one, it really, I didn't love it right away. And I think part of it is because I do have a lot of internalized racism, and I didn't see books like this growing up. And I wondered if anyone would pick this up if they saw it, because my idea was to have just the main character and maybe her mom, or just the main character. And my editor and I talked about this a lot, and she was just like, well, I see this as an ensemble cast. Like she saw it like as an ensemble cast Korean drama, and she really wanted it to read that way on the cover, like just look at it. And so there's like 6 Asian characters on here. She translated my title in Korean and she put it on here. And I will say that I was the one that was like, who's going to buy this book? And it was really sad that I had that thought, because I felt like I had a lot of barriers that I needed to break down within myself. And through the process, it was very healing and also very telling, like things that I had repressed for so long that I didn't realize were still, I was still harboring. And so I think I had to really process that. And I still, even the way the faces were drawn is this cartoon drawings that Koreans draw very uniquely about, when they draw other Koreans. So it's very, very Korean to me when I look at it, that I was afraid that people would be like, oh, that's a Korean book, I can't read it, I don't understand it, blah, blah, blah. And I'm happy to say that like my whole team was really behind it and thought it was going to do well. And it was a little bit sad to know that I needed to be convinced that it was, this is what we need. But I think at the end of the day, I feel like, we do need to normalize more diverse covers and things that are not more of the same, right? So anyways, it was a process. I feel very like, I feel a little lighter having shed that internalized, it's still a work in progress, but you know what I mean? Like it was the first step.
I love that. I love that you said that about like who would buy this. And it's just having to stop and ask yourself like why. I think I asked myself a lot of those questions while during the cover process of JYLBD, because I knew exactly from the jump what I wanted kind of the cover or at least like the vibe of the cover, the colors of the cover. It's the pink, orangey, yellow, because the book was set in the area in which I grew up, and one of the things that's a really prominent feature is like the sunsets, and so how many colors there are, and I still haven't ever been able to find a sunset that's quite as beautiful as that. So I really wanted to get that right. And so I really loved that they loved my vision, and published, and Five Well and Friends was really great at letting me kind of just be as picky as I wanted. Like in one iteration of the cover, like these buildings were a little taller. And I was just like, there are no skyscrapers in this area. The soil can't support them. Like, you can't put that there. Why are those trees green? They should be brown because this whole area has been in a drought. And so that it was really nice to get to like send those emails at like 3 a.m. And putting Maggie on the cover was definitely an interesting thing to watch people's reactions to, because the number one comment I got was like, well, like, couldn't you make her look a little prettier? And I was just like, well, what do you mean? They're like, her nose is a little round and she's got like, round cheeks. And I'm just like, okay, so you want me to make her look like a white person? Okay. You want me to thin out her nose? You want me to do like, give her more cheekbones, even though she's like a kid? And so it was interesting to watch even like people in the community like say these things, and I'm like, watch that internalized bias. And it was just made me really sad, and also just made me more resolved in my fact that like I wanted to have a cover where the character wasn't like beautiful, or it wasn't naturally beautiful. And so I think I was just really happy to have the say in the cover that I did. Yeah.
So just one more time, this is my cover. The cover designer is Laurent Lin, and the art is by Goni Montes. And Goni is a queer Latinx artist, which I was really excited about. But the really funny thing is, like, and then hearing all you talk about it is when they asked me like for the vibe that I wanted or whatever, I was like, no faces. I don't like faces on book covers. I think it makes people imagine certain things when they read a book. I'm like, no cartoon. I literally everything I got, I was like, I don't want that. But I wish they had come back to me and been like, oh, well, do you know what it'll mean is for a Latino kid to see a Latino on the cover? Instead, they were like, this sells better. Like, they were like, faces sell in YA. And I was like, okay, cool, I guess. Like, but I was like, okay, yay, sell more copies. But I wish I had gotten the more of a pathos sort of reasoning. But anyway, yeah. But I think similar to Grace, like I've had to sort of learn to love it. I always joke that it's subtly bisexual when it's like pink, like it's the bi colors. So I do love that. I love the typography, which we had to go back and forth a little bit. I remember when I first got the sketch, I was like, so one thing, I still don't think he's like thick enough. I don't think he, like in the book, he talks about like his body insecurities, and I don't think it really represents that on the cover, but he was skinnier. So I was like, at least they made him a little, like when I told them to, they made him a little bit heftier. The other thing too, is I was like, he needs leg hair. I'm like, a big thing, like growing up was like, I was a hairy kid, and like it made me feel all sorts of way, like when you're self-conscious about your body and that, being different from other people or whatever. So I was like, that needs to happen. I do appreciate the Chucks also, because that's very Californian, but I also wish we got some Vans on there, although maybe we do. I think the other person is wearing Vans. Anyway, but yeah, these are all the things that go into a cover, and it's funny, people think authors have like all this control over it, but we don't have that much. But I do trust marketing, and it's, yeah, Goni's also really just really cool. They like, I went on their website as soon as I got the name, and like they have all this like Power Ranger stuff, and I'm like, I love the Power Rangers growing up. Like, it's so cool.
Speaking of, Erin, when you said that, like, we don't, like, people think authors have all this control over everything. I'm like, where did you get that information from? Who told you lies? Like, I obviously love my publishing team so much, but I didn't like my books. My name is like written kind of in like that cursive-y font, And I was like, oh, like, can I not like do that? Like, I don't really like my name written in like a cutesy font. And they were like, oh, marketing really thinks that it'll sell better because teenagers like that kind of cursive font. I was like, okay, so is that a no? Is that your way of saying no? And like, I mean, did I win that battle? No. So yeah, we don't really have that much control.
You have as much power as they give you. It's
Yeah,
like
for
if they
sure.
allow you to have a say. But also I work in publishing, so I was an editorial assistant and an assistant editor. Still am looking for work. If anyone can hire me, that'd be great. But yeah, it was, and so I know those things to say to authors to like make them seem like they have a choice even when they don't. It's like kind of like a toddler's choice where you like hold two things up and you're like, which of these do you want? It's kind of like that. And so I feel especially crummy when I'm like, when I hear the things that they say to me and I'm like, I know what that means.
Can I jump in and say that I had surprisingly a lot of say and like fewer toddlers choices, and that I'm really thrilled to hear that regardless of if we got to like I got to pick my cover artist. They sent me about 8 different people and I liked one of them and she was too busy to do the work. So I said, I don't really like any of these other options. And I went and found options and sent them options. And they like I literally picked the artist, which is wonderful. And they won the battle on having the portrait because they were right about the value of the portrait. But I'm really glad to hear that we all had artists who like could represent the people we were asking them to represent. I think that's a big deal that we ought to celebrate, because I know so many writer friends who still aren't getting that, or getting audiobooks where the person doing the work can't pronounce the words or the names, right? So like I'm really happy for us on that end of things.
Yeah, Jen and I were talking about this in the chat, but my cover artist was like also was a Chicano from the border, but from the El Paso border. So he also had a handle on just like the nature aspect of it and like kind of what the colors are and what things look like. So when I told him, he was like, "Okay, got you immediately. I can see what you're saying." So that was really helpful.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, my mom just texted me. She's watching this, and she likes the cutesy font, Claire. She's a fan of it. Also, one thing I forgot to say about my cover is like it's 2 boys, and they're like quasi holding hands. And one thing that I thought about too was like, I think part of why I wanted silhouettes, I wanted slightly more subtlety on the cover, is like I thought about like queer kids not being able to take it home, and that's always a big discussion with queer books, is like, do you want it to be stealthy so they can like, if they're not in the most accepting environment, can they take it home? So I just thought about that too, and I'm like, there are just so many things like when you're a marginalized writer, it's like to think about that other people don't have to think about, because obviously if it were like a boy and girl on the cover, like there'd be no thought process behind that. But with this, I was like, is a kid not going to be able to read it? Because if they bring it home from the library, like their parents are going to find it and they're scared of that. Like, so that was another thing too. But I hope, yeah, but I hope despite that, kids can still ferret it away and read it under the blanket with a flashlight or something. But yeah.
I felt that same way with my title. I was just like, "Oh no." I was like, "What? Kids can't buy it. Like, what's gonna happen?" I considered having an alternate book jacket made where you could flip it over, and then the title would be Bad at Love because I wanted it to be. Anyway, but yeah, it was that idea of like having to consider all of these like even basic safety issues where it's just like not only could this like get someone like teased or like verbally harassed, it could get them physically harmed. And it's like it's a hard line to straddle, like versus representation versus like exposing somebody.
Yeah, definitely echo all of what people are saying, and like I don't know. It was just something as I was making the panel graphics for this. It was something that like suddenly kind of clicked when I was looking at all the covers, and I was like, wow, this is such a joyful experience to make like these banners for everyone's covers that just feel so different from like when I was a teen going to the library, you know, and like now I go to the library and I see like all of these other covers. I'm like, wow, this is like really interesting and like kind of cool. And super fulfilling and like affirming to my soul. Anyway, I'm gonna drop the giveaway link another time for people, and I will put it in the description box because sometimes there's some issues with the live chat replay showing up afterwards. So I will put it also in the description box. And thank you all for joining and chatting. I'm really glad that we could end on like a really kind of just being excited about the covers as well, even though it was totally spur of the moment. And yeah, I'm so happy that everyone is able to join us. In the link, the description box below, there are links to everyone's books. So you can pre-order and also order the books and take them with you, beautiful covers included. And yeah, I hope that everyone has a really great day, and we'll see you all in the next one.
Thank you so much, Lily.